Hey YouTube. Sorry. Today we're going to talk about the types of rods and reels that I use for bass fishing and why I pick those. There's a lot of videos out there about different types, and it's guys that kayak fish, guys that fish tournaments, guys that shore fish, etc., etc. I don't fish too many tournaments anymore. I am trying to get into some kayak tournaments. I do kayak fish. I do a lot of shore fishing. I occasionally bum along with a buddy on a bass boat, but I do a lot of traveling fishing as well. My family, will go down to Table Rock Lake, things like that. So there's a specific reason why I picked the rods that I have, but the lengths, the powers, the types of reels and things will apply to everything. But all of my rods are two piece, and the reason for that is portability. And today, the rods are so good that there's very little that you're giving up with a two piece rod. So let's get started. And the first rod that we're going to look at is a 7 foot long, medium heavy, fast action. Again, this one's two piece, all graphite rod. The brand and whatnot, not really important. Find a rod that you like, find a rod you can afford. This is a Bass Pro Shop Tourney Special. I really, really like this rod. Very, very sensitive, nice stiff action. And what do I use this for? I use it for Texas rigs, for fishing jigs. Maybe heavy spinner baits, but I've got another rod for spinner baits and I'll explain that. If I'm in a place where I'm limited to rods, though, I may throw a spinnerbait on this. I may even do some light flipping and pitching with this rod. But I've got 12-pound line on here. I prefer to use something heavier for flipping and pitching. This is a Abu Garcia Black Max reel. 6'4" to 1, I believe. It's on here somewhere. No, I just found it a second ago. I believe it's a 6'4" to 1. I've got it spooled with 12-pound. Yes, 6'4" to 1. I've got it spooled with 12-pound line. The majority of the bass fishing I do is with some sort of a Texas rig, soft plastic, with 1/8 to 3/16 weight and a 2/0, 3/0 extra wide gap hook, with a 4-inch creature bait, a 6-inch, either ribbon tail or straight tail worm. And this does that spectacularly. It's got a fairly soft tip for sensitivity, but a lot of backbone for setting the hook. I did notice when I had an extra fast action, this is just a fast, when I had an extra fast action, I noticed that when I got bites, I tended to rip the worm out of the fish's mouth. With this, I don't do that, and it's still a very stiff rod. Still got lots of backbone. I still rip 12-inch fish over the top of the boat when they bite right next to it. But you don't worm fish with a meat stick, which is what I was using. This is just a classic worm rod. It's 7 foot long, medium heavy, fast action. Excellent, excellent rod. I could put heavier line on here, 14, 16, 20-pound test. I could flip and pitch with it if I wanted to. I certainly throw larger, heavier baits. I do throw lizards. I throw like a Mondo worm or something along those lines, a 10, 12-inch worm with a 5/0 hook and quarter, 3/8 ounce weight or even heavier. I can Carolina rig with this, and I will from time to time, though I tend to prefer my flipping and pitching rod for that because it's got heavier line. But I can Carolina rig with this. It's spooled with 12-pound line. It's pretty well all around. It's just an excellent rod. And when the family and I go somewhere and it needs to go behind the seat of the truck or in the trunk of the car, it works for that. If I'm traveling somewhere with my kayak and I need to put it in a storage compartment that I have in there, it works for that as well. Take the reel off, take the rod apart, slide it up in there in a sock. I don't have to worry about the rod getting damaged. But you don't have to have a two-piece rod. That works for me. Now, put this to the side. That is the rod that if you see me out on the water, that is the rod that I'm going to have 90% of the time. 95% of the time. And 90% of the time, it's going to have a 6-inch June bug colored worm on it with an 1/8 to 3/16 weight and a 2 or 3/0 extra wide gap thin wire hook. That's just what I like to fish with. That's what I catch fish. But if I'm not catching fish, I'm switching it up. Now, what other rods do I have? I have a cranking rod. Everybody needs a cranking rod. What do you mean by cranking rod? You mean a 6.5 or 7 foot medium fast action rod? No. That's become popular. A lot of guys do use full graphite rods for crankbaits now. I'm old school. I was taught to use a fiberglass rod, and I just find that I catch more fish with crankbaits with fiberglass rod. So this is a 6.5 foot medium heavy power, more of a medium action. But it's a medium heavy. And why did I pick medium heavy? Well, some guys use graphite rods for crankbaits. I don't. And a fiberglass rod is, got a nice parabolic bend, nice and whippy-dippy tip, nice soft action. But sometimes you don't get a real good hook set. With this being a medium heavy, I get a much more powerful hook set. I've got backbone, but I've got that nice soft tip so I don't rip the lure out of the fish's mouth. So I give it that extra second to grab a hold of it, and then I drive it home. Now for this reel, an Abu Garcia Max winch. It's in the Max series, like the Pro Max, the Black Max. The other one was Black Max. I'm partial to Abu Garcia reels. You're going to see that. But that doesn't mean that's what you need. This one has a 5:4 to 1 ratio. Slower for crankbaits, so you can get those deep diving crankbaits way down. I use this for crankbaits, jerkbaits, top waters, with the exception of buzzbaits. And with the exception of frogs. We'll get into that in a little bit. But any plug type lure with treble hooks, this is what I'm throwing. It's 6.5 foot. I wouldn't mind going to a 7 foot, but this rod serves my purposes very well. Again, it's 2-piece. It also doesn't work bad for a channel catfish rod. I've got this loaded with 10-pound. Oh, again, all the line I use is monofilament. I don't think I mentioned that. This is with 10-pound mono. I don't use the super lines, the fluorocarbons, the braids, things like that, because I'm a cheapskate. Get a little more stretch, which is advantageous sometimes with mono. I find that if you use the right line weight, fish don't tend to see the mono in the clear water as much as you would expect. Your mileage may vary there. I haven't had a problem with it, especially with a reaction type bait where they just don't have time to really see. They just see the lure and they grab. But 10-pound, I'm fishing more open water. I might go up to 12, maybe even 14 if needed. But for crankbaits and things, 10 pounds seems to suit me just fine. And that's my crankbait plug topwater rod. Lay that to the side. Okay, now we're going to get to my meat stick rod. Now, when you hear that, you think a 7.3, 7.6, heavy action, extra fast action with maybe 40, 60 pound braid. You're going to be disappointed if that's what you expected. This is a 7 foot, medium heavy, extra fast. I've got an Abu Garcia Black Max. They're inexpensive. They hold up very well. I've had these for several years now. I use this rod for worm fishing. This is actually the rod that I said I just jerked too many lures out of fish's mouths, so I went to one with just a slightly softer tip, just as much backbone, just as heavy hook set and rod, just a slightly softer tip. But this one, I've got 20 pound line on. It's 7 foot. I'm not very tall. I'm only 5'9". A 7 foot rod I can flip and pitch with. I can throw frogs with this rod. I can get up in heavy cover with 20 pound line with everything cranked down. I can horse a fish out of cover. It's a 6.4 to 1. For me, that's plenty fast. A lot of people like a faster reel. Your mileage may vary. If you like a faster reel, that's fine. This is what works for me. I can really just horse and set a hook, get it up out of cover, speed it out of there, get my fish, get back into it. Heavy timber, lily pads, reeds, boat docks, things like that. I'll flip and pitch with jigs. I'll throw heavy jigs with this. I'll throw Carolina rigs with this. If I have to pick just a couple of rods, this is one of them that I'm going to take with me at all times. And when we finish up with the different rods that I have, I'll show you the ones that I want to have with me all the time. Obviously, that worm rod, that first one we looked at, that's one that I will, if I had one rod to fish with, that's the rod I'm fishing with. I may take another reel with me. That's the rod. But this is another one. This works, again, for heavy worms and things, but typically, if I've got one of those on there, I'm going to flip, pitch, things like that, please. Okay. Just a second, we'll grab another rod. Okay. And look at that. Another Black Max. Imagine that. I've got 3 of those. And I've got that Max Winch, which is basically a Black Max with a little larger spool and a slower year ratio. Now this here is a 7 foot, medium heavy, I'd say medium fast action. It is a graphite fiberglass composite rod. I have 10 pound line on it. This is my spinnerbait rod. Okay. What? I like a slightly softer tip on spinnerbaits, and I don't like the whippy dippy fiberglass rod, but I like a slightly softer tip on spinnerbaits, on buzzbaits, things like that. It just tends to keep me from jerking the rod out of the fish's mouth. This works very well. I also use it for, I can use it for catfishing, things like that. I like the 7 foot because I can really just reach out there. It's just again, spinnerbaits, buzzbaits, lipless cranks. I'll use this for lipless cranks when I'm trying to get really deep with them and reach out, set that hook, reel fish in. A 6.4 to 1 has, you won't wear yourself out burning a spinnerbait or a buzzbait up on the top. It'll bring one up pretty quick. It'll bring a fish in pretty fast. It's just a good all-around speed. 10-pound line again. I'm typically fishing open water with this rod. I don't do a lot of spinnerbait fishing, buzz baits, things like that. But this is a rod that I feel I need to have in my arsenal. And then my last bass only rod that I have is 6.5 foot. And pardon that you're not getting to see the whole rod and everything. I'm giving you just more of a description, a little bit of a visual here. Where I'm set up, I just can't get to where you can see the whole rod. I assume that the guys that are viewing this, you know what medium heavy means. You know what fast action means. You don't need to know which rod I have. You've got your own preferences as far as brand, price line, things like that. That's fine. Now, I'm going to deviate a little bit. This is a Lew's. This is an excellent rod, actually, and reel. It's a combo. It's an American Hero series. Being a veteran, I really like that. My dad gave me this a few years ago. Makes a good just travel rod, and that was the purpose of it. It's a 5-to-1 gear ratio. I thought it was a little faster than that, but I'm looking at it right now. It's 5-to-1 gear ratio. It's an excellent rod. Trying to wrap this line so it doesn't get tangled up. I don't have anything rigged on right now because I just respooled these rods. I thought while I had them out, I'd do a little bit of a explanation of what I use. I've gone into it before about what rods you need, what not, but I thought this time I'd actually show a little bit, go in a little more depth. And honestly, I kind of got a little arrogant with the last video. Well, this is all you need. Hey, mileage varies. You may prefer something that I don't. That's perfectly fine. This is what works for me, and it can work for you. If you're getting started and you don't know where to start, I think I can give you a pretty good place to start. Over the years, you're going to decide, just making sure that's not cracked. There's a little bit of a chip in the paint, but it's fine. You're going to decide what you like. You know, I started with what my dad fished with, and I changed with my own personal preferences, and you do the same thing. This is a 6.5 foot, medium weight, medium to medium fast action. Maybe it's got some backbone to it, but it's got a pretty good tip. It's a solid fiberglass rod. I use this for my finesse rod for drop shots. I'll throw light spinner baits. I'll even throw small cranks, small Texas rigged worms, wacky rigs. That's where it excels to me. Small tubes, jigs, things like that. Just finesse type lures. I've got 8-pound mono on this. A lot of guys would prefer 10. Some guys would prefer 6. To me, 8 works really well. If I'm fishing cold, clear water, like we go to Table Rock in the spring, I might change that to 6. This is a fairly high capacity reel. As long as I'm not having a problem with them seeing my line, 8 works just fine. I may put a 10 or 12 foot leader for 6. Really, really finicky fish, I may even go down to 4. But I'm not going to spool the whole reel like that. 8-pound works pretty good. Again, light crankbaits, 1/8 ounce, or light crankbaits under 1/4 ounce, light spinner baits around 1/8 of an ounce, wacky rigs, Ned rigs, weightless worms, weightless Texas rigs, small flukes, things like that, drop shots, tube jigs, curly tail jigs, things. That's what I throw with this rod. And it works very well. Small inline spinners, actually. You're fishing, not too far from the Merrimack and the Burbus Rivers. May fish for smallmouth. Put a 1/4 ounce inline spinner. Works really well with this. So, now, you're fishing a place where you're limited to the amount of rods. Maybe a tournament, maybe a local lake that only allows you to have 3 rods, something like that. Which rods do I prefer? I like to take my ultralight with me. I didn't show you that. I've got an ultralight rig, obviously, for crappie, bluegill, trout, things like that. Love to take my little girl trout fishing. Yeah, okay. She's over there. She wants me to show you her pole. And this is her pole. Little Shakespeare. While I'm at it, though, this doesn't make a bad dock rod. And it's a 4.5 foot ultralight little Shakespeare kids combo with a reel on it. It's not one of the integrated reels. We got her one of those and it was junk. If this reel breaks, I get another reel. The rod's good. It's an ugly stick. I can take this thing and just about bend it tip to tip. I won't. It's not my rod. It's my daughter's. Right now I've got 6-pound line on it because it just seems to work better with this reel. But I think I'm going to get her a different reel. I've had 4 on it. It just works good for her. Nice length and whatnot. There you go, Becca. Oh. Just hang on, Becca. Okay. So, you're limited to how many rods you can take. Maybe your kayak only has a few rod holders. Maybe you're fishing on a lake, a municipality where you only take 2, 3, 4 rods, etc., etc. Okay. Rod that I would always have with me is that 7 foot medium heavy fast action that I use for Texas rigs, jigs, etc. That rod I'm going to have with me because I'm always going to have something I can throw Texas rigs. And if I have to, I can use that rod to throw spinner baits, things like that. I can flip and pitch with it, but I'm going to have to be really careful because I've got a lighter line. I'm not going to be able to horse them like I normally would. I'm going to have that 6.5 foot spinning rod, medium action, for finesse fishing, for throwing jigs, drop shots, wacky rigs, things like that. I'm going to have that with me at all times. And if I can only have 3 rods, then I'm probably going to pick that spinnerbait rod because it's got a soft enough tip that I'd be comfortable throwing crankbaits, etc. I'm probably not going to do much deep cranking with it, but with a 6-4-1, you can if you have to. And with 7 foot, you can do the technique where you can get the rod tip down in the water and really just get it going. So that would work. The next rods I'm going to grab would just depend on what I'm going to do. If I'm going to do a lot of flipping and pitching, I'm going to grab that rod first. If I'm going to do a lot of cranking, I'm going to grab the other rod first. Obviously, I would prefer to take all 5 rods with me if at all possible. And a lot of guys would like to have 6, 7, 8, 10 rods. You fish tournaments, you see that a lot. You'll see that a lot, pardon me. But for me, I just don't need that. I find that these work really well. Now I've got another rig. This is a spare setup. This is in case I've got somebody with me that needs a rod to borrow. I also use it as a catfish rod. Mainly, it's got another reel on it. If I bust a reel, I can throw this reel on there. This is a cheap reel. It's a Quantum. I believe it's around 6-4-1. Let me see if I can find the gear ratio. It's actually the same rod that I use. It's a 6-1-1. It's actually the same rod that I use for spinnerbaits. But I found that this one had just a little bit of a tweak to it on the end. It's a fiberglass graphite composite, medium heavy action. So what I did, I decided to make it my catfish rod. Nothing really wrong with the rod. Still cast fairly well. Might not get the accuracy I want with specific lures and things. But put a 1 ounce weight and a 1, 2, 3/0 hook on it. Throw it out there for catfish, works just fine. 12-pound line on that 6-to-1. I can still kind of get the torque to bring in a heavy fish. But it's just a spare more than anything. I had that reel sitting around as a spare for a while. I replaced this rod for my spinnerbait rod with the exact same rod. Both my spinnerbait and my crankbait rods are Dick's Sporting Goods / Field and Stream Jawbone series, by the way. They're very cheap rods, but they hold up. I mean, I have had these things beat around in my truck. Now, this one, the tip did take a set, but that was my own fault. I had some weight on it in the bed of my truck. It got hot. It took a set. I've been slowly trying to straighten it out, but for a catfish rod, no big deal. So, I've got my setup. Hopefully in the next video, what I'm going to do is show you my preferred lures, my tackle box, go through all that, and what I carry with me. This setup works really well for shore fishermen, for kayak fishermen, for guys that travel, guys that maybe rent boats. Maybe you're going to go to Table Rock, you're going to go to Lake of the Ozarks, you'll go down to a marina, you're going to rent a boat for the day, and you want to do some bass fishing. It'll work well for that. You get a John boat, doesn't have a rod box, things like that. You don't carry a lot of rods. And what I've got isn't horribly expensive. Like I said, I've got some of those Jawbone series rods, $10-15. Not the highest of quality rods, but for what I use them for and the construction I wanted, pretty good rods. My worm rods are a little higher end, but I've probably, if I'm looking at just the rods and reels, maybe all 5 of those rods, $300-400, maybe a little more. You could certainly get 5 nice outfits for under $500, I would say, and I'm pretty sure I'm under that. But I bought them over a period of time. Maybe I'm a little higher. You could spend $500-600 for one setup if you wanted to. That's up to you. You say, well, I like Lew's better than Abu Garcia. That's fine. I prefer nothing but Lew's rods, nothing but Garcia rods. That's fine. I've got a hodgepodge. The only ones that I got more than one of is the Jawbone rods. They're fairly inexpensive rods. I've got that. My flipping pitching rod is a Cabela's Pro Guide series that I love. My worm rod is a Bass Pro Shops Tourney series. Again, I love it. The other rods work very well. I don't use them as much. I don't have any problem with them, but I've put a little more money in the rods that I use the most. That American Hero spinning rod combo. Again, not real expensive. Again, 2-piece. Works really well for what I want to do. And if you find that you're a little, start out a little cheaper. You find that you're a little harder on specific rods, harder on certain equipment, slowly replace it with a little better gear until you've got the setup that works for you. I've got the setup that works for me. Maybe you prefer braided line. Maybe you prefer fluorocarbon. That's all fine and dandy. Again, I'm a cheapskate. I just cannot bring myself to spend $10, $15, $20 just to spool one reel. I just can't do it. And personally, for what I do, I don't need it. For my flipping and pitching, 20-pound mono works just fine. Cranking and spinnerbaits, 10-pound mono works just fine. Finesse fishing, 6 or 8-pound mono works just fine. Worm fishing, 12-pound mono works just fine for me. I do not use blue line. I will occasionally use green. I typically use clear. That tends to work the best for me. I will use green sometimes in really heavy cover, but I'll generally just tie on a 6, 8, 10 foot leader of that. Uh, I will on occasion, when night fishing with someone that has a black light, use blue line leader because it allows you to see your line move with that light. Uh, I'll use that, and what I'll do is strip off 30, 40 yards of line, tie on that blue line, and go at it. But I don't do that very often. I've done that, once or twice. It works, but clear line works real well for me. 12-pound line, worm fishing, even in clear water, tends to work pretty well for me. If I need to, I can go down to 10. And the nice thing, I use a lot of the same reels. I've got 10-pound line on some, 12-pound line on some. If I'm fishing with worms and I'm fishing with 12-pound line and I'd like to use some lighter line, take my reel off my crankbait rod, which is the exact same reel, stick it on my worm rod, and the same thing. If I'm fishing crankbaits but I'm getting hung up in cover and I want a little more meat, take one of my other rods with the heavier line, other reels with the heavier line, throw them on there, and I was wrong. Not my crankbait rod, just general rule, because that's got the winch on it with the 5.4, slower speed. My spinnerbait rods say. Take that with a 10-pound line, put it on my worm rod, or vice versa, depending on what I need at the time. The controls are all in the same place. The rods and the reels feel the same. The handles feel the same. I'm comfortable. I do recommend that when you get yourself set up, that you get several of the same type of reels. If you can get the same series with different speeds, that's awesome. My spare is not one of those, but my main bait casting reels, all Abu Garcias, all Max series. I would like to get a Pro Max at some point. It's a little faster, but the Black Max works really well. The gear ratio works good, but I wouldn't mind for a worm rod having just a slightly faster action or slightly faster ratio. I believe they're like 7:3 to 1, something like that for the Pro Max. I haven't got into the Revos, etc. I'm not a hardcore bass fisherman. I do fish quite a bit during the summer. I don't make my living fishing tournaments and things like that. I also have a family. I've prioritized myself a little different. So I try to get quality things that work without just absolutely breaking the bank. I wouldn't mind. My dad has a Revo winch that I would love to have someday for crankbait fishing. Again, Abu Garcia guy, I got it from my dad. The old Ambassador standard round reels. That's what we started. That's what he started fishing with. That's what he started me with. When they went to the low profiles like we have today with the graphite bodies and things, again, back to Abu Garcia. That's what I've fished with for years. And that's what I really like. That's what I'll continue to fish with until I just think they make junk, and I don't think that's ever going to happen. Again, your mileage may vary. You may prefer Lew's. You may prefer other manufacturers. You may prefer Quantums. I've got that Quantum over here. I had Quantum lights over the years, the old Quantum lights, and one thing I really liked about them was that they had flipping switches on them. The old 5.48 and 5.3 to 1s, they had flipping switches on them. Nice reels for the money. I mean, back in the 20, 25 years ago, you